will be recorded via the internet and this recording archived for future viewing. Could all participants mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking? If a participant wishes to speak, please use the hand up facility. If you're on screen, you can wave your hand at me as well, or you can use the chat function, but the preferred method would be the hand up facility if you can, please. If any participant has difficulty hearing or being heard, they should let myself or the Democratic officers know. If they have a webcam, probably their first point would be to turn this off, and that should help your broadband bandwidth. If that does not work, please ensure that I or the Democratic Services officers know that you're having difficulty. We have some public speakers today, welcome to them, and some attendees observing as well, and welcome to them. So with that, the formalities over, I will start the agenda. And agenda item 1, as always, is apologies for absence. So are there any apologies for absence?
I haven't any, Chair.
No, I've had none either. With that, then I take it there aren't any. Are committee happy with the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 25th of November 2020? Are you happy that I signed them?
Move the minutes.
Thank you very much. If there's no one dissenting to that, I will sign them. No dissenters? No. Lovely. Thank you very much. That moves on to agenda item 3, which is declarations of interest. So do we have any declarations of interest?
Yes, Chair. Andrew Parker.
Yeah. And your declarations, Andrew?
Yes, 2019/01194/FUL, of which I'm the architect, and 2020/00711/FUL, coupled with 2020/00712/CAC. I know the applicant, and he is a quantity surveyor, and I have used him, so I will remove myself for those 3 matters.
Thank you, Andrew. I gather we're all sorted as to how you will rejoin and whatever, so I know that's in hand.
Yeah, I think that's all okay. Thank you, Chair.
So if I could ask you to leave now then. Oh no, hang on.
Oh, Chair, we've got a report beforehand.
Oh, there's more declarations, yes? Any more declarations? No, just Public Rights of Way subcommittee then. Now then, we have to work out how this is sorted. Do we have nominations from the group leaders, or not necessarily leaders, but members of the group? Do we have their nominations for this committee, or are we going to take them at another point? Ian, do you know who your nominations are for your group?
Thank you, Chair, but we don't have any members on this. So on this subcommittee, it's 2 Conservative, 2 Labour, 1 Vale Independent.
You are correct.
Thank you, Chair.
Correct. Yes, I will be the Vale Independent group member. The Labour group. Anybody from the Labour group know who their nominees are?
No, I haven't been told anything. So
no.
Do we need it now, Jonathan? Or
I'm sure we can deal with this at another juncture. Really, this comes to us at a different time of year. Normally, it normally comes straight after the AGM.
Yeah.
So if we're happy to approve this, we can just circulate the relative members to planning committee at a later date. Are you all happy to do that?
Yes, and I will get the names to you.
Thank you. And there would be 2 Conservative nominees as well, Gordon. Would you be, could you organise that for us at a later date, please?
Yeah, I'll make sure that's done.
Lovely, thank you.
I believe we've had the nominations in for the Conservatives, Chair, but obviously if Councillor Kincaid can confirm those at a later date, we can do that then.
Super. Okay. So if I don't hear anything in the next kind of 20, 30 seconds, I will take it that you're happy to approve the Public Rights of Way subcommittee, which we will do. Yeah, thank you. So I will now ask Andrew to leave, if he could, please, and we'll contact you when we're ready for you to come back. So that brings us on to the planning applications.
Chair, very quickly, just had a message. Councillor Wright sends her apologies, just for committee to note, and we'll put that in the minutes. So
yes, if you could, please, Mark, that would be really good. So the first item on the agenda for planning applications is 2019-01194 full 16 Tyronin, Welsh St Donats. As you know, Andrew Parker has declared on this and has left us. Vicky, I believe, is going to introduce this to us, and then once Vicky has introduced it to us, we do have Councillor Michael Morgan, who is going to speak. Michael called it in. So if I hand over to Vicky now, she'll run through the application for us, and then we'll go to Michael and hear what Michael's got to say. Okay, over to you, Vicky. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just trying to share the plans with you a moment. Hopefully you can you all see that on my screen?
Yeah, I can see it.
Great, thank you. Okay, members may well recall that we've dealt with some planning history on this site not that long ago. It relates to an existing dwelling and its surrounding gardens and curtilage out at Tyronin, just off the A48 before you get to Cowbridge. And this is not a settlement for the purposes of the local development plan, so it's not a location where we would normally permit extra new dwellings, and members will be familiar with our policies that protect the countryside in that regard. The history that we dealt with on the site was for a dwelling roughly in the area of the stable block that we're looking at now on the existing layout plan that I've got on the screen. And it was refused on the basis that we wouldn't permit new dwellings in this kind of location. In an attempt to try to overcome those concerns, the latest proposal before you today is for what's described as a granny annex and shown on the layout plan on the screen. Hopefully you can make that out. And essentially the building has been moved closer to the existing house, is connected to the existing carport in the dwelling, and is no longer shown within it with its own access. The level of accommodation proposed is obviously a self-contained unit with bedroom, bathroom, porch, living and kitchen area. And as the report sets out, whilst it is described as a granny annex, the recommendation is for refusal on the basis that we think this should be treated in all intents and purposes like a new dwelling, because it is the level of accommodation proposed within the building and its degree of separation from the main house means that it is more akin to a new dwelling rather than a granny annex, and it could in future years quite easily be separated from the main house with its own access and garden area, and we would find such an application quite difficult to refuse in due course because of the degree of separation from the annex. Now, the officer's report goes into some detail about recent appeal decisions along those lines, where we have refused other similar proposals elsewhere in the Vale of Glamorgan and been successful at appeal. I'll just show you the photographs of the site to give you a bit of a flavour. Some members may recall a site visit. It wasn't that long ago. We were out on site having a look at this one for the previous application that came to Planning Committee. So this gives you a bit of a flavour. I think we've got an aerial view as well here to show the site and its surroundings. This is the dwelling that we're talking about. That's the existing stable block here. They all come in off this access off the A48. You can see here on this photograph the nearest bus stops on the A48 here. And one of the areas of concern in terms of new dwellings in this location is its sustainability in terms of access to alternative means of transport. Whilst there are bus stops relatively close by, they rely on you being able to cross the A48, which in this particular location doesn't have, crossing facilities. It is a fast road. I'm sure members will be aware of it. And in this particular location, it's quite wide given the designated right-hand turn. We're up to 3 lanes here. So those were the sort of considerations as to why it was refused before. We don't feel it's gone far enough on this occasion to address those concerns. We did talk to the applicant and agent about doing a more traditional extension to the house itself to provide the granny annex type accommodation, which, has overcome other areas where we have refused similar proposals, have been overcome by being able to extend the house rather than providing an annex which is separate and divorced in terms of its physical and functional relationship to the main house. But unfortunately, they have decided to proceed with this proposal rather than that. I would just draw members' attention then to the late reps that have been received. Hang on a minute, sorry, I'm trying to stop sharing my screen, but it doesn't seem to want to allow me to do that. So bear with me a second. You're going to see.
Do you want me, Vicky? Would you like me to display them?
Yes, if you can, Marcus. I'm sorry. I was just trying to come off share screen there, but I think I've closed everything. But the late reps we've received from Councillor Morgan and that have obviously been circulated to all members beforehand. Hopefully you've had a chance to read through them, but I'm sure Councillor Morgan will reiterate it when he's speaking now, the reasons why he's in support of this application. And then obviously, I'm happy to take any questions that you may have after that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Vicky. Michael, can you hear us? Are you there?
Hang on. Yes, I can hear you, and I put my camera on now, but I'm in the car actually.
Yeah, if Marcus could stop sharing the reps now, Marcus, if you wouldn't mind, please. Thank you.
Yeah, there we go.
There you are, Mike. Yeah.
Oh, there we are. Right. So I'm not actually driving, so please don't worry about that. I have stopped. But I hope you've all seen the email I sent in yesterday. And my observation on this application is one of policy rather than this individual application. And this is something I've addressed previously before the planning committee, and that is to devise some kind of policy to promote retirement accommodation within our rural communities. My view on this application is that this is what it does. It provides a retirement home for a family who've lived in this community since 1992, brought up their family there. But at the moment, we don't seem to have any policy as such within the Vale or with the Welsh Government to promote retirement housing. And by that, I don't mean big retirement villages. I mean within the existing communities where people can remain if these are places that they have lived their lives, brought up their children, become part of the community. In particular, Tyronin, I know it's been said that this is in open countryside. I wouldn't agree with that. This is a little corner plot on the edge of the existing Tyronin area. It's currently occupied by a stable block and a cesspit. It's not really open countryside. There are no local objections. And my understanding is it's not intended as some speculative application. But all I hope that comes out of this meeting is perhaps that the council take an objective view on retirement housing to assist people in communities who want to stay in their communities with sympathetic development, which indeed could be subject to development to restriction, so it can't be resold other than as a retirement property. I just hope this is something we can take forward in future applications and in future policy, whatever decision you might reach today. So please read what I've said in the email, see how you apply it to the current application, and see whether you are with me in a proper consideration of retirement accommodation planning in the rural Vale in the future. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you just hang on there a minute, Michael, while I just ensure that anybody need anything clarifying from Michael on his speech. No clarification needed. Okay, thank you very much, Michael. We will let you go now if you want, or you can you can stay there and watch how we get on.
I'll turn the camera off and I'll listen in. There we are.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you for your input. Okay, so that means it is over to us as committee to debate. Do we have Councillor Gray has his hand up? Councillor Gray.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I understand obviously the intervention from Michael in terms of his passion for the subject, but I think we're treading similar ground to previous applications. There's a clear policy within planning for us to support officer recommendations on this, as I understand it. I wonder, Vicky, if you might elaborate a bit further on what would make this acceptable. I know we don't go back with a try again this version, but I'm sure that we've approved granny annexes in other parts of the rural Vale. Is this something which, you know, if they put in something different, you would be approving? I'm happy to move off to recommendations, but I would be curious to understand how future applications could be viewed positively.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Yes, over to you, Vicky. I know Vicky has had a conversation with the applicant and the applicant's agent, and I know discussions were had on having an extension, for want of a better word, a granny flat which is permanently joined to the house, so it can't be sold off as a separate property. But they've obviously chosen not to take that route. But I don't know if you want to enlarge on that a little bit more, Vicky.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. And, you know, our main concern here is the degree of separation in terms of the, you know, the siting of this proposed outbuilding, which is only connected via a carport, which could easily be demolished. And, you know, it's some distance from the main house, and there's no interconnectivity between the house and the outbuilding. Add to that the level of accommodation within the outbuilding, which clearly has everything that you need to live independently, entirely as a separate dwelling, and therefore it fails to meet the test that we look for in terms of having a physical and functional relationship to the main house, which is why you would call it an annex and treat it as an annex. We've had discussions about the potential to extend the existing house. You know, there does appear to be the room and ability to be able to do that and to do something that would work in terms of its visual impact and layout within the site, but that would be very much a granny annex in terms of its form and function relative to the house. And that's a conversation that we can continue to have. Whilst the point that Councillor Morgan made about, you know, you could legally tie it or control it in some way to make sure that it is retirement living, the fact would remain that there would be nothing that we could do to prevent any future applications for it to be separated and segregated from the house. And once it's there and it's built, it's much more difficult to resist those kind of applications. So that's why we resist it first time round, when there's, you know, alternatives that can come forward. And members may recall a site in Graig Pentline where we refused planning permission for an annex around the back, and we won the appeal on that one. You know, we've recently granted an extension there for similar levels of accommodation that, you know, we came to a solution there that is acceptable in planning terms. So it can be done. I'm sure there's many other examples that members may well be familiar with, but I don't think what we're suggesting here is unreasonable.
Lovely, thank you, Vicky. Now I've got a few people wanting to come back. I think I'll go to Marcus first, then Ian, and then Neil Thomas. So if I ask Marcus to come in next, please.
It was only really just, thank you, Chair. It was only really just to point out, on top of what Vicky has said, which is all very relevant. Welsh Government, we know, are currently considering how they will take forward this issue of older persons accommodation. One of the massive issues we've got, which Vicky pointed out to, was that albeit we could put conditions on this type of property if we wanted to allow it, it's very unlikely it would stand up at appeal or indeed going forward if it was challenged in law, because there is no legislative backing to putting conditions like that on properties, on new properties, unlike agricultural or rural worker dwellings, which have a long historical established basis. So, in the future, as part of any review by Welsh Government, it would have to be done through legislation to essentially legalise that type of control over properties, and it may well be that's the route they go down. And I completely understand Councillor Morgan's, frustration with that to a certain extent. But what I would say is that at this time we don't really have a mechanism of stopping a detached, fully functioning dwelling, which is called an annex, from becoming a fully functional dwelling in the future. It's really difficult to stop that, and you're pretty much allowing a fully functioning dwelling to be developed, as Vicky has said, and it really is. The principle as it stands for granny annexes is that they should be really attached to, or as much as possible attached to, the main dwelling. So it's just a bit of clarification around that, that's all.
Thank you, Marcus. Ian, you wanted to speak.
Thank you, Chair. I'll second the officer's recommendation. I think anything that's been done so far. Marcus, I think, has answered, partially answered my question. And obviously, I think what we have here is a series of decisions which our officers have found in favour of our officers, and their rejections of these granny annexes in rural areas. What I think I'm interested in, we raised it in the last meeting with reference to the larger home in Wenvo, is that both there needs to be a Welsh Government policy or line on this, and a local policy on how we are dealing with older people's accommodation. I think these are coming through to us on a fairly regular basis. We've dealt with most of the candidate sites from the LDP, so we're now dealing with often smaller or things with interesting, unique characteristics. But there's a theme developing, and I'd like to see the council take forward, through its policy function, to consider how we should be dealing with this. It obviously wasn't dealt with effectively within the local development plan, in how that was done. How are we going to deal with this now and within the wider regional development plans as they come forward? I think it would be good, not as a part of the planning meeting, but to have an understanding of how we are going to deal with these issues, because they do keep cropping up, and it feels that there's not a real solution other than to shrug shoulders and say, well, this is where we are. I think people making these considerations about their future deserve a bit better. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I think Marcus is just wanting to come back on that, Ian. I pretty much agree with you. I don't know whether we can get this in the LDP review. Perhaps something could be done in the LDP review, but I'm sure Marcus and Vicky will enlighten us now as to how we go about it.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's not really to come back. Obviously, Councillor Johnson's raised a very, very valid point. It's something that Welsh Government itself really, and I think this is where we're sort of stuck in a little bit of a grey area at the moment. We need Welsh Government to legislate almost to tell us, or certainly to provide guidance, clear guidance on their thinking, which we can then incorporate within our policy. The reason for that is that it's all very well as developing a policy on something, but the minute, if it has no legislative or at least guidance backup, it'll be pulled out by the inspector and just won't get through. So it's really, we're in a bit of a difficult place at the moment. I think that will change. And if you think about the Future Generations Bill and the requirements of that, that certainly there is very much clear guidance and clear talking about properties for life, which is what the type of properties the council is building now, which are properties for life. And that will roll through, I'm absolutely certain, into private properties too, and indeed into consideration of settlements and smaller settlements, rural settlements and sustainable settlements, and how you deal with the difficulties of having older persons accommodation retained as older persons accommodation as well, going forward, because it's all very well developing that accommodation now, but of course the problem is it ends up disappearing from being older people's properties as you go forward from the next time it's sold. So they're all very complicated issues, but not insurmountable. And I think I'd just like to give some confidence to Councillor Johnson that that is very much one of the things which Welsh Government are looking at. It's a key to the future generations, really, isn't it? And I think I hope that by the time we come to review our LDP, or certainly write a new LDP, that this issue would have been sorted. The one final thing to end on is, in the meantime, there is, albeit there is a mechanism for people to stay in their communities. We've become more flexible on granny annexes and the type of accommodation you can build. I think where we are at the moment is we want that accommodation to be of a style and of a form that allows it to be reincorporated into a main dwelling were the need for the annex to cease. But, hopefully we can move forward to perhaps a more sustainable location.
Thank you, Marcus. I've got Neil Thomas, who's been waiting very patiently now, who would like to come in. Neil, would you like to come in? Neil, are you there still? Or have we lost you?
Yeah, there you are. How's that now? I seem to be silenced again. I thought I turned it off. Right, yes. I share Councillor Morgan's concerns about accommodating our ageing population, of which I'm one, in their communities, and for allowing them to remain in their communities with the growing families and so on that are following on behind. However, I can understand that in this case, the potential for this proposal to become a separate property is all too real, no matter what the intentions of the people who own the property now have. There's no guarantee they're going to be living there in 10, 20, 30 years' time, and that becomes then a major issue, because this then would be a separate property in all but name, and there's not a lot, as you say, that we can do about it. Vicky did tell us last time that we've got the LDP review is going to be coming up soon, and there are a number of issues where policy should be firmed up. This is one of the areas. Things like Section 106 is another one. I know you're going to get bored of me saying it, but then things like energy and sustainable builds and so on, which perhaps needs to be written in more strongly. I would urge them to look. I'd urge the officers to look at those in the LDP review, but that's for a later time. But yeah, I support officers' recommendations.
Thank you very much, Neil. As there are no more hands up, and we have had a mover and a seconder, I will ask initially, are there any people who would like to go against officers' recommendation? So are we unanimously approving officers' recommendation on this? So I don't need to take a vote.
Yes.
Thank you all very much. We will say it's a unanimous committee decision that the recommendation is followed. So that moves us on now to agenda item number 2020-00711 full land off Rosebery Place, Stanwell Road, Penarth. I believe Peter Thomas, our conservation area officer and senior planner, is going to lead us through this. So I'll hand over to Peter. Once Peter has done, we do have some public speakers on this. We have two public speakers. They are Mr. Terry McCarthy and Dr. Christine Stokes. So once Peter has introduced us to this, I will ask Mr. McCarthy and Dr. Stokes to come in, usual format. So I'll hand over to Peter now, and we'll come to the public speakers after him.
Thank you, Chair. So the site is located to the rear of 86 Stanwell Road, with a frontage to Rosebery Place. It's located within the Penarth settlement boundary and the Penarth conservation area. It measures approximately 290 square meters and currently houses a single-story outbuilding and a block of garages. The application seeks, it also includes an area of amenity space which serves one of the flats to the rear of 86 Stanwell Road. The application seeks planning permission and conservation area consent for the demolition of the existing buildings on the site and their replacement with a 3-bedroom dwelling with associated external works. The dwelling has a contemporary design with materials that are a mix of modern and traditional to reflect the character of the area. These predominantly are a red imperial-sized brick with a dark mortar and a roof covering of standing seam cladding with solar thermal and photovoltaic panels. The flat roof element is to be covered in a sedum roof. The proposed building respects the building line of Rosebery Place to the left of this image, but that means it's set to the back of the plot, immediately adjacent to number 88 Stanwell Road here. That's the elevation there. This rear elevation here shows that relationship with Rosebery Place and the adjacent neighbours as well. Access for the proposed dwelling will use the existing access off Rosebery Place. Is there anything further you want from me on that?
I don't think so, Peter. I think you've given us a very full introduction to the application. I think
Chair, sorry to interrupt. Can I just? I don't think we've flagged the matters arising that have been circulated to members. Peter, if you can just summarise those, please.
Apologies. Yes. So we had 2 matters arising. The summary of those is that the proposal failed to preserve the characteristics of the conservation area. The proposal represented an overdevelopment with concerns of the scale and massing and overbearing and overshadowing of neighbouring properties. And there were also comments received objecting to the officer's appraisal and considerations in the report. In response to those, the assessment of the character and appearance of the conservation area is set out in the report. In terms of overdevelopment, there was a refusal of an application for planning permission in 1991, which was refused on the basis it was an overdevelopment of the site. Since then, there have been significant changes in planning policy at both a national and local level, with greater emphasis on higher densities. So in line with national and local policies, it's considered the proposal does not comprise an overdevelopment. The scale and massing and the overbearing and overshadowing issues are considered in the report, and it was concluded by officers that the scheme is acceptable. In terms of the other considerations, the second material consideration, matters arising, there was concern that the development represented backland development because of its relationship with number 86 Stanwell Road. National local policy no longer make any reference to backland development, with all proposals being considered on their particular merits and circumstances. And whilst the site is located at the rear of Stanwell Road, it has a substantial frontage to Rosebery Place, which is a material consideration and was considered in the assessment of the report, with impacts on neighbours also detailed in the report.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. That does lead us on to the public speakers, and I will take them in the order that
Jonathan,
I have.
Can I just ask Peter a question on this, on what he's just told us?
Yes, we'll get into the debate after, Neil. Normally we have
not a debate; it's a question of Peter.
Go on then.
All it is you mentioned the property at 86. Stanwell, can you, because this is their garden effectively, and it's already been extended considerably. Is it divided into flats, or is it separate dwellings, or what?
86 is subdivided into 4 flats. So part of the amenity space serving, I believe it's flat 4 of 86 Stanwell Road, is within the red line of this site. It will be reduced if this proposal is approved, but the remaining amenity space would still exceed the minimum standard set out in the council's SPG.
Okay, thank you. Right, we will get on to the public speakers now. And first on my list is Mr. Terry McCarthy. Mr. McCarthy, can you hear me?
And can you now hear me?
Hear you loud and clear, and I can see you clearly. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I believe you understand that you have 3 minutes to speak. I will be quite firm on that. So I'll hand over to you, and once I hand over to you, you'll have your 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to start with the overdevelopment of the site question and the previous planning application, which was refused in 91. I have looked in the Vale of Glamorgan Local Development Plan 2012, and there is indeed, as the planning officer states, a minimum requirement for densities. However, it goes on to state lower density levels will be permitted where it can be demonstrated that 1. Development at the prescribed densities would have an unacceptable impact on the character of the surroundings. And I think this takes me to the other points I would strongly like to make and bring to your attention. The character of the area, I think, is enshrined in the fact that we are talking about a conservation area. Constructing a substantial house on what would have originally been part of a garden of a Victorian street layout can hardly be regarded as preserving the pattern of the urban developments that conservation was set up to preserve. Where our Victorian forebears, who are not shy of making speculative money out of housing development, chose to leave a garden behind a house, why should we, as custodians of that heritage, feel that it's right and proper for us to allow that garden to be built on? I think the garden is an intrinsic part of the character of the area. Gardens indeed are very important in Penarth. Are we not? Isn't the town known as the Garden by the Sea? It's not known as a load of backland developments by the sea. Doesn't trip off the tongue in the same way. On terms of scale and massing, the application is for a relatively large building on a small garden site. I'll resist calling it backland. Other buildings in such locations on the lanes are generally small, modest scale. This isn't of a small, modest scale. The current garages on the site are about 173 cubic metres. Using the dimensions in the report, we're now looking at a house of some 654 cubic metres. That's nearly 4 times bigger. The much greater volume is partly driven by the very large plan footprint which is proposed, coupled with the heights of the building. The size of the footprint means that the principal windows in the proposed house and flat number 4, which has already been mentioned, will be very tight, 10 metres between the two, whereas the planning guidance requires 21. The planning officer's report suggests a number of mitigations which would get over perhaps the privacy concerns of that standard. However, it wouldn't get over the fact that a considerable amount of daylight and outlook would be reduced from either set of windows. The fourth area of my concern is the overbearing and overshadowing.
Mr. McCarthy, your 3 minutes is up, I'm sorry.
And I think my neighbour, Christine Stokes, will carry on where I leave off.
No problem. If you could just hang on a second. I just need to ask committee if they have any points of clarification. Mark, I can see you've got a hand up, Mark Wilson, but is that a point of clarification or is that part of the debate? Because the debate we will do after public speaking.
I'm going to do it as part of the debate later on.
Thank you, Mark. Could you? Yes, thank you. So no more clarification? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. McCarthy. We will now move on to Dr. Christine Stokes. Christine Stokes, Dr. Stokes, can you hear me?
Bear with me, Chair. I'm going to make her a presenter now.
Yes, no problem.
Should be able to hear you now, Chair.
Okay, Dr. Stokes, can you hear us? Hello, Dr. Stokes.
She's on mute, I believe, Chair.
Okay. Dr. Stokes, you seem to be on mute. Could you...
Dr. Stokes, you need to unmute yourself now.
Great. Some difficulty here. Dr. Stokes, can you hear us? Mark, can you unmute Dr. Stokes? Or I can probably do it, actually. No, I can't.
No, can't, I'm afraid, Chair. They have to do it themselves.
Yeah.
Let me, bear with me a second. I'll try and get in touch with her now, Chair, see if there's any problems.
Okay. Sorry, committee. We do have the odd problem now and again with technology. Mark is going to try and contact her by telephone, I'm guessing. We will give her another minute or two. I don't really want to dip out of this application and have to come back. So if you just bear with us for a minute. Still on mute, according to the screen. No news.
Just calling out, Chair.
Okay. I think if we can't get her in the next 2 minutes, we'll have to start the debate while you try and get in touch with her. And if you can get in touch with her by the end of the debate, we'll have to bring her in then. I don't know how that sits with you, Mark. Is that okay? Marcus is wanting to come in. Yeah, Marcus, could you advise?
Sorry, Chair, one suggestion. If the previous public speaker had the comments that were going to be made, could he make the comments on behalf of...
James, could you advise us on this, please?
I think with democratic services, we do have the ability for where there is more than one speaker for them to nominate someone to speak on their behalf. So as a group, if you've got more than one speaker, they can nominate a single person who can speak for the full 6 minutes.
Okay.
That may be an option, but she'd have to.
Yeah, that's correct, Chair. But also we need Dr. Stokes' permission. So perhaps I'll have a quick chat. If I'll drop Mark a message now. See, perhaps Dr. Stokes.
Hang on, Chair. I've just spoken to Dr. Stokes. She's trying to unmute herself, but she's having problems. So she's going to rejoin the call now, Chair. Okay.
Okay. Well, we give it another minute. Failing that, if we can't get her within the minute, we will move on to the debate and come back to Dr. Stokes after our debate. Okay, this is one we haven't
I believe Dr. Stokes has just rejoined, Chair.
Okay, Dr. Stokes, can you hear us?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Stokes.
I'm sorry, that was really stressful. I've got no idea what happened because I had clicked it off, but there we are.
Don't worry, we all get technology problems. So when you're a little calmer and you're ready, you have 3 minutes to put your point across. Are you okay to start?
I just want to put my timer up so I keep an eye on myself.
I'll let you know, don't worry.
I know that, I can tell. Okay, look, shall I just go for it?
Over to you, yes, please.
All right, okay, thank you. All right, thanks. So I just want to start by saying that we are not any of us objecting to the principle of a development here. I want to make that clear. It is the scale of it and it is the proximity to which we object. It is, and if it's bold and exciting and dazzling, we're happy with that too. That's not the issue for us. We sent you packs, and I'm going to refer to those, the ones that we hand delivered or we emailed to you yesterday. We believe that the design and access statement does not have a before and after assessment of the material issues of loss of outlook, loss of daylight, or increase in overshadowing. So we commissioned one ourselves. And this is produced by Jonathan Adams, the architect for Wales Millennium Centre. If you go to page 7 of that, that's a very striking image, and you can see there, you're standing outside my kitchen there on the garden patio. It's 9 o'clock in the morning in August. Now, when considering the impact of overshadowing, both height and distance to boundaries are determining factors. A 2.5-storey building right on the party boundary wall will therefore have a massive effect, and that's what you can see here. That's the effect of it. It's got the effect of loss of outlook, loss of daylight, and significant overshadowing. On page 8, the next page, you get a similar feel for the adverse impact on the outlook of Terry McCarthy's house, 90 Stanwell Road. Here you're standing in their dining room looking out at what you can see there. Now, I'm going to whiz you over to page 9, which is 2 windows that are looking out onto this from the flats that are directly parallel to it on the opposite side of the lane. These are 4 separate flats, and those 2 windows are actually living room windows, a studio and a living room, because as you know, flats are aligned in a different way from houses in the way we move within the space. Now, the closeness and the height here results in a significant reduction in volume of light through both windows into their living areas. And I think you can see easily what the substantial impact on their outlook will be. Now, finally, whizzing through to the final few pages is the overshadowing here. And we've taken it 3 different times of the year, same time. It doesn't look too bad, does it? But the reality is that's when it's starting to clear. And in March and April and May, and in September, we are in complete shadow in the back of the house, and on pages 2 and 3, in complete shadow in the front of the house. And I would add that the development is going to be casting at least as much shadow onto its neighbour's land as onto its own, and that is a material consideration. So, in summary, we are asking you as respectfully but earnestly as we can to please reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You were very good with your time.
Thank you.
Very efficient. If you just hang on a sec, just to make sure I don't need anything clarified. Any committee members would like anything clarifying from Dr. Stokes? No, I don't see any hands up. I don't hear any. Okay, thank you very much indeed. We will now have a debate and go and vote on the application. Thank you, Dr. Stokes. Okay, Peter, do you want to come back on any of those points raised by the public speakers before we open the debate up?
If there's anything in particular, Councillor, I'll happily respond, but the issues are dealt with in the officer report.
Okay, no, right. We'll go into the debate then and come back to you if we get some questions. So first person with the hand up is Councillor Mark Wilson. Mark, over to you.
Hello, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear, Mark.
Thank you very much. Okay. A reason why I called in this application to committee, because obviously I did hear about a lot of concern with the neighbours over this development. And I'd like to consider to reject this application for the following grounds. For the first reason is the failure to preserve the characteristics of the conservation area. Now, if you turn to page 30 in the report, okay, it talks about the fact that on page 30 in this report, I'll just get to you, it talks about that in respect to density, Policy MD6 require residential proposed within a service area down to 30 dwellings per hectare. But this site provides an overdensity of 34.48 dwellings per hectare. And therefore, this is considered to be overdensity, okay, of this site. That's one point I want you, the planning committee to consider. The second point I want to consider is the concern over the street scene as well. If you look again on the same build, on same page, on page 30, look on the street scene. Look at the construction of the actual roof and its design. It doesn't seem to be very compatible with the other street scenes on the same side. If you look on the left, on the right, you see the roofs are quite different. And this roof is very, very different in comparison with the styles. And we are talking about a conservation area here where, you know, we should be talking about developments which should be compatible but not incongruous. Now, if you refer to the next point I'd like you to consider is the scale and massing of the development. Okay, if you look at the fact is that the report states on page 20 that the actual development is, and I know Mr. McCarthy also referred to this in his speech, of at the moment we've got 173 cubic meters, but this development will have a development of 654 cubic meters. That's almost almost 3 times, in fact more than 3 times bigger than what's there at the moment. And we are talking about the conservation area, not talking about a development outside of it. And the other fourth point, which I know Dr. Christine Stokes has referred it to, is the huge amount of overbearing, overshadowing of this development. You've got to bear in mind that with the pictures supplied by Dr. Christine Stokes, that you can see there's an awful lot of overshadowing development, and I believe this is a strong material consideration. But remember, this development will, this overshadowing will occur almost every day of the year. It's not going to occur one day in a year, but almost every day in a year. And you've got to think about, from their perspective, of course, being neighbours of development, that's a huge overshadow. And finally, of course, I'm not, the key point I'd like to say to you all here is that, you know, as the local member, and as I'm well aware of the area of Victoria Square, I don't think this development is compatible. I think it's an overdevelopment of the site. I think it's incongruous. It's not compatible with the street scene. And I really believe that this should be rejected for those reasons. If there was development which was smaller, more in proportion of any developments around there, then I would ask you. So I ask you to reject this application. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. I have a request from Councillor Burnett to come in and speak. Normally she would speak just after the public speakers. I must have missed the request. I am happy enough to allow Councillor Burnett to address committee. Peter, could you answer any of Mark's concerns, or did you want to respond to any of Mark's concerns before I ask Councillor Burnett to come in?
Sure. I think on the density issue, it's a very difficult one when you have a small site to do a simple density calculation, and you know it shows that it's 36 dwellings per hectare. It does achieve that minimum. The report also notes that the wider context there has a lower density of 22 dwellings per hectare. You know, the introduction of one dwelling on within that wider area will have a marginal increase in the density, which is in line with the policies. The introduction of one dwelling on the site, though, officers feel is an acceptable proposition.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Peter. Right, Councillor Burnett, can you hear us?
I can, Chair.
Would you like to address committee? You're not very loud, so if you could speak up for us, please.
Right, thank you, Chair. Hopefully that's better.
Yes.
I'm not going to go into all the technicalities that Mark's gone into. He's far more expert than I am on that sort of thing. But also as local ward member, and also living not too far away from the development, I virtually walk past on a daily basis. And I've looked at it regularly from various angles, and the scale of the development, the way in which it will be in such close proximity to all the other buildings leads me to feel quite strongly, and I think this is the first time I've ever objected to a development such as this, but it does feel very much as overdevelopment. The other thing is, I mean, in the types of houses that we have around here, I just to give you an anecdotal story, one day I wondered why the sun was suddenly shining through my kitchen window, and it was as simple as a neighbour had pruned a tree in their garden. Such small differences can make a huge difference to the light that's available in a house. And looking at the position of this, as I said, looking at it from various positions, whether that be in the lane, whether that be coming from Victoria Square or coming from Stanwell Road, I just cannot see that would be anything other than incongruous, and just felt that I really needed to make my views known to committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Burnett. Glad to have you along. Okay, so who would like to talk about this or ask any questions on this application? I don't see any hands up. Oh, I do. Councillor Thomas, Neil Thomas, come on in.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, I disagree with Mark on the design element of it. That under the conservation rules, that modern design isn't a problem. However, I do agree with him in terms of massing and overdevelopment. I had a question which I put up in the chat, but I'm told that that's the wrong place to do it. So I'll raise it here now. Peter talked about one extra dwelling not adding pressure to the density of occupation of the area. However, this is maybe the first of many. It may be one, but then there'd be another and another and another. And I think his comment is actually lacking foresight. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Neil. If you could drop your hand, and Vicky, you would like to come in and say something, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just want to clarify the purpose of the density policy in the LDP, which is primarily there to make sure that we make best use of land, to minimise the amount of land take we need elsewhere in the Vale, in terms of green fields on the edge of settlements. That's the purpose of that policy, is to make sure that new developments are of a higher density than they were historically. It is a little bit of a moot point when it comes to this kind of development, because that level of 30 dwellings per hectare is assuming that you have a site of 3 or 4 hectares and you're dealing with a development of 50, 60, 100 houses, that sort of thing. And it's to guide developers to make sure that they're not developing at low densities on greenfield land. It doesn't really work in this kind of urban context. You'll find densities of 60, 80 dwellings per hectare in urban environments. I think it's relevant to the consideration of the character of the area, and Peter's alluded to that part of the report where it specifies, the densities nearby at the moment are lower, 20 dwellings a hectare, and that gives you a feel for the character of the area, being larger dwellings, larger plots. Refusing something on the issue of density, is not really the correct thing to do. If you feel something is overdevelopment of the site, you have to point to the reasons why you feel it is overdevelopment of the site. It's not just a mathematical argument. It's one of, what are the impacts? Is it an issue of privacy, overbearing, overshadowing on neighbours? Is it an issue of character of the conservation area? So I just wanted to kind of clarify those points, to sort of move away from the issue of just it being a scientific density argument.
Thank you, Vicky. Right, Councillor Gray wants to come in, but just before I invite him into the debate, I will remind you guys on Planning Committee, chat really is not the place for the debate on this. If you have points, I know it's there, but the chat isn't recorded, and we need any points made on this as a matter of the record. So please keep your point to verbal discussion, if you would, please. Thank you very much. So Councillor Gray, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the very eloquent public speakers. I think it was a really useful debate, and I can assure those that I read all the matters arising and the documents they put through. In terms of when the first speaker talked about building on a garden, I think it's clear from our next application, conservation area application, this is replacing these 3 garages. I don't know that I could characterise it as destroying a pristine Victorian garden, but that point aside, I've seen many examples in my ward of modern buildings next to Victorian being accepted, including in areas of the conservation area, and I don't know that it would stand up to an appeal on that grounds. And I can understand where some of the conversation about density comes from, but I've read the report and I'm comfortable with how the officer has dealt with those concerns and justified those. And as we know from planning committee, that there's always an interpretation, and that's why we're here to look at that interpretation, decide if it's acceptable. And so on that basis, I'd move the officer recommendations for this application. Thank you.
Councillor Gray, I would second your movement, and as we have no more hands up on this one, I will take it to a debate. I'm assuming there's going to be differences on this, so I'll go through the roll call as usual. For myself, just for the record, I will be voting in favour of officer's recommendation. I will ask Councillor Gray just to confirm how he's voting, please.
Yeah, in favour of officer recommendations.
Thank you. I will now ask Councillor Birch, please.
In favour.
Thank you. Councillor Christine Cave.
In favour.
Thank you. Councillor Pam Drake.
In favour.
Thank you. Councillor Driscoll, Vince Driscoll.
In favour.
Thank you. Councillor Stuart Edwards. Councillor Edwards, do we have Councillor Edwards there? Yes. Sorry, Councillor Edwards, could you repeat?
You say in favour.
Thank you. My sound was going a bit funny then. Councillor Nick Hodges.
Against, Chairman.
Nick, could you say that again? I missed it.
Against.
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 Thank you. Councillor Ian Johnson.
Against officer's recommendations, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Gordon Kemp.
In favour.
Thank you. Andrew Parker has declared an interest. Councillor Leighton Rowlands.
Against, Chair.
Against officer's recommendation. Okay. Councillor Neil Thomas.
Against.
Thank you. Margaret Wilkinson. Councillor Mark. 4. Thank you. Councillor Eddie Williams, I understand you came in late on this and will not take part. Is that correct?
Abstaining, correct, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mark Wilson.
Against the application.
Thank you. The officer's recommendation, you mean, Mark? Yes?
Yes.
Yes, okay. And Councillor Margarita Wright has given her apologies. So that is clearly carried. So we need to move on now to the conservation area consent for the same application, although it's a different number. It's 712 CAC. Peter, do you want to say any more about the conservation? I think you best give us a little outline of how this reflects and what it means, please, if you could.
Of course, Councillor. It's subtly different. It's purely concerned with the value of the buildings in terms of their contribution to the character and appearance of the conservation area. They are modern functional garage type buildings, and the officer view is that they make no particular contribution to the character or appearance of the conservation area, which is backed up by the conservation appraisal management plan for the area, and the recommendation is to approve the demolition of the buildings, subject to there being an appropriate scheme to replace the buildings on the site.
Lovely, thank you, Peter. So, does anybody want to? Yes, Councillor Gray, you want to come in?
I think, Chair, in view of our last vote, I just move officer recommendations. This facilitates what we've just voted on.
It does, and this is a much more cleaner decision, cut and dried as far as I'm concerned. I will second you. What I will do on this one, I will ask, is anybody against the conservation area consent for the demolition of these garages? Nobody against? Can I take it then that you are all in favour and it's a unanimous decision for the conservation area consent? Yes?
Yes.
Thank you very much indeed. That was very good. That now leads us on to Flemingston Court. Now, I believe we need to get Andrew Parker back. So just a little pause now while we try and get Andrew Parker back in the debate. May take us a few seconds or minute or two, perhaps. Mark, are you or somebody on the case?
Yeah, Chair. My colleague Gareth is going to
rejoining
give
now.
Councillor.
Yeah, there he is. He's rejoined.
You're a star. Thank you, Gareth. Excellent. Andrew, can you hear us?
Yes. Well, yes. Thank you, Chair.
Back in the room. Right. We're moving on now to Flemingston Court, the application 2020-009504. And I believe Vicky is going to run through this. There, I don't think are any matters arising on it. No. And there are no public speakers on it. So over to Vicky.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully you can all hear me and see what I'm showing on the screen, which is just the plans. The reason this matter is coming to Planning Committee is because the applicant is a serving member of the council, Councillor John Thomas. It's a relatively straightforward application in all other regards. It is for horse-related development on an existing horse-related site at Picketson Stud. The building is within the complex of the existing farm complex here. You can see the scale and form of the building proposed, and as you'd expect for this kind of use and traditional design. No concerns raised. It is a relatively sensitive site in the wider context, given the listed nature of buildings in the locality, but this in isolation won't detract or isn't considered to be harmful in that regard. The photographs I'm sharing on site give you some context here, but obviously the officer's report goes into some detail as to why we consider this to be an acceptable proposition on this existing site. And so officer's recommendation is for approval.
Thank you very much. Okay, Councillor Gray, you have your hand up.
Thank you. Yes, it's not a legacy hand. It is for this particular one.
Don't worry.
I've read the report. I think in view of this being an operational farm building in a farm and only being in front of us because it's a serving councillor, I'd move officer recommendations on this. I think it's in context to the environment. I don't believe there are any harmful effects from it, so I'd move officer recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. I will second that. Does anybody have any questions of Vicky or anybody else in that? No. Are we all happy to go with officer's recommendation on this then? I don't think we need a vote. Anybody have any dissent? Please speak now or forever hold your peace. It's all quiet. I'll take that as a unanimous decision then. Thank you very much. Okay, so that moves us on to our last planning application, which is 2020-011484. A little bit more complex, this one. There's some enforcement as well as a recommendation to deal with here. So I'll hand over to Vicky and she'll enlighten you on our model rail.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully, again, you can see the photographs that I'm sharing on the screen and you can hear me clearly. So this application is before you because we have a dual recommendation here. Otherwise, again, it would have been delegated, but because we're recommending enforcement action, as this is a retrospective application, it's come to committee for a decision for both the application and to take enforcement action. The land relates to land in the countryside outside Llanmaes, and it we have previously granted consent for the householder to use some of his land for to have some railway tracks, and I understand he's a railway enthusiast and has a small gauge railway on the site, which has been granted planning permission. But activity over time has been monitored, and you know, the nature of the use occurring on site appears to have changed somewhat over time. This latest application in front of us, the application itself only relates to the change of use of the land, and associated with that, the storage and restoration of a railway carriage, which you can hopefully see. It's the green round-topped building closest to the hedge in the photograph being shared on the screen. That's what the application relates to restore that carriage and to store it on the land whilst that restoration is being undertaken, and for a period of 18 months before it is moved on to an alternative site, which I understand is outside of the Vale of Glamorgan area. The report also touches on the other unauthorised outbuilding on the site, which you can also see in this photograph. Here, the building with a picture and the label called the station. Again, this is all on land outside of the garden and the site. It's actually, if I can move my cursor, it's in this area, as you can see on the Google Maps, close to the road. In an area where, you know, which is countryside and should be protected as such, and where we, you know, do not permit incidental buildings or change of use for this kind of activity. You know, the countryside should be protected for its sake, for agricultural activity, horse-related activity, rural enterprise type activities. These clearly are not, and therefore the report sets out the sort of visual harm and impact of doing this. So the recommendation is to refuse the planning permission and also to take enforcement action to seek the removal of these buildings from the land. And I'll leave it there, I think, Chair.
Thank you very much, Vicky. OK, does anybody want to? Yes, Councillor Gray, I can rely on you. Thank you, Ben. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. And I mean, I didn't raise any kind of interest, as in a register of interest in this. Members who know me may know I'm a bit of a railway aficionado, so I do take some exception to the idea of a restoration of the wagon, when essentially what I can see is a separate dwelling, almost something which could be converted into a holiday let. I'm not saying that that's necessarily what's going to happen here, but I don't think this is to restore it to be a railway wagon. And I think that's clear from what's being described, and the intention appears to be to build it and move it as a holiday cottage somewhere else. And I think if we give this 18-month consent, it will still be there in a few years. I've read the report, and I'd move Officer recommendations in terms of refusing the application and approving the enforcement action.
Thank you, Ben. Would anybody else like to speak? I'm happy to second the recommendation, including the enforcement. Anybody like to speak on this? No, no hands up, nothing in the chat. Okay, so we'll go straight to the vote then, seeing as it's been moved and seconded. Is there anybody not happy with going with officer's recommendation? If you would like to make it known now, please, if you're not happy with officer's recommendation, and that is for enforcement as well as to deny the application. So I'll take it from that you're all happy that we go with officer's recommendation. Yeah, thank you very much. Nobody's coming there, so that is it. Okay. Thank you. That brings us to the end of our agenda. I don't think there's anything else on there. I have no urgent items in part 1 or part 2. It leads me on to say a very happy and safe Christmas. Please be sensible over the festive period. Please keep yourselves safe and your families. Have a very good Christmas, and we will talk to you in the new year. Thank you all.
Same to you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Chair, Merry
Thank
Christmas,
you.
everyone.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Merry
Wish
Christmas
you the
all.
best, stay well.
Have a good
Have a
Christmas.
good festive season.
Yeah.
Merry Christmas all.
Cheers.